hand over this mic to Dr. Meghna. She is in my team and she worked well to prepare this webinar. So, this over to Meghna. Dr. Meghna, please. Dr. Meghna, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah, Meghna, please take over and you can start now.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining today's hematology webinar. And today we'll be discussing a few topics from an exam point of view. And after this, we will also have a doubt clearance session. So I think we'll start now. And so, yeah, I'll hand over to Sir. Hello? 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 Hello?
Yes, please.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
I think.
Yes, you go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible. Go ahead, Manish. Dr. Meghna.
Hello? So your voice is breaking?
No, it's all okay.
Hello?
Yeah, you are audible, Dr. Meghna. You go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll be doing a hematology review session, and we will be covering certain topics from an exam point of view. Some of the topics that we'll be covering are anemia, leukemia, lymphoma, hemoglobinopathies, tumor markers, and few other topics. So we'll start with the presentation now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Welcome to everyone, all friends. I'm happy and glad that you all are here on the one platform. So without wasting the time, I will switch to our main discussion point, hematology. We did last year, but there are many new friends, so we try to make it more updated slides. These all questions, what I'm going to present is all high yield and exam related. So, and it is very, very important in day-to-day practice and clinical practice, right? Whatever the queries, confusion or questions you have, you just write down, right? So we can discuss later on one by one, and we may spare some time to clarify the topics as well as some questions from the group. One request, if you are not, speaking, just there is one setting on the bottom of your mobile phone or laptop, so you can make your mic mute, so background noise and voice will not interrupt you and me. When you want to speak or when you want to ask the question at the end of session, you can again unmute that button. So that would be great, right? So I'm going to start as the Meghna presented, told. Uh, Now our session, our team, myself is Dr. Munjal Mentor, CEO of educational company Medical MCQ for All.com. Dr. Farah is in our team, Director of Global Medical Education now in USA, and she's born, brought up there. She is coaching for USMLE Step 2, 3 as well. Dr. Manisha Fadke, she is again a very senior practitioner in our team. She is practicing more than 25 years in UAE, Dubai now. Dr. Aarti is a pediatrician specialist. She is gold medalist and she is pediatric expert in our team. Dr. Shabnam, also known as Dr. Sana, she is a general practitioner and she is in Qatar, Doha now. And Dr. Meghna, Dr. Meghna is again, general practitioner and she is a clinical scientist. She worked quite long time in United Kingdom, and she also recently cracked last year the DHA. So she will going to go for Dubai practice very shortly. As I told you, I'm basically hemato-oncologist and bone marrow transplant fellow. I have 20 years plus clinical experience. and out of the 20 plus years, 15 years in hematology, oncology, and stem cell transplant. I did my bone marrow transplant training in Italy, Rome, and I worked also in Australia, Kenya, and Oman in Muscat. This is our website, medicalmcqforall.com, which is like an educational website for all DHA, HAD, MOH, and all Middle East countries and prometric exams. This is my email and our data flow. We provide the data flow services. It will be taken care exclusively by Dr. Meghna. And as I told you, USMLA step 1, 2, 3 by Dr. Farah from USA, and Dr. Manisha is also looking for many DHA, HAD, MOH, as well as MRC GP and MRC GP 1, 2, 3 exam. So as per your need, you can contact any of our team member. So now I will switch mainly to the topics we have. I mean, we provide the study material, Prometric 1000 online subscriptions, personalized and group coaching, WhatsApp subscription. This book and website is used in more than 125 countries. So that would be, I mean, amazing. And this is the latest reports. More than 500 plus students cracked exam with 80% success ratio in first attempt. 80,000 plus Facebook this group doctors, and 5 plus, I mean near 4.55 plus rating in most of the this modules. So quickly I'm going through the session. Just I want you to listen the questions properly. These all are the high yield questions. We tried a lot to make it better and more educative. So you write down the question, and then at the end of the day, I mean the session, you can check your score, how much you make it wrong, how much you did it wrong, right? So that also gives you the idea. So just get a pen and paper. I'm going to go with the first question. In CLL, that is called chronic lymphoblastic leukemia, hemoglobin is of 13 gram, WBC white blood cell count of 80,000, platelet count of 200,000 per cubic millimeter. There is no organomegaly, there is no lymphadenopathy. What is the stage of CLL? So this question is a question of CLL, chronic lymphoblastic leukemia, and they're asking about the stage of the CLL. So A option is stage 1, B is stage 2, C is stage 3, stage 4, stage 0. So just think over it. What could be the stage of this disease? Just give a 15-second thought process on the question. Write down your answer, and I will disclose the answer after 10-15 seconds. So just you need to decide the stage of the disease. This is CLL. This is CBC parameter. Organomegaly, lymphadenopathy is absent, and now they're asking about the staging. So what could be the staging of this patient? Hopefully you noted down your answer. Am I right? Am I audible well? Am I audible well?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
Very nice. So answer of this question is this. This is the learning point. This question, yeah. So this is a CLL. CLL is basically chronic. These are the learning points. So answer is stage 0. If whatever you tick, answer is stage 0. We'll come to the point now. What are the learning point in CML? Whatever I'm going to discuss is all high yield points for the exam. No here and there. If you remember this slide, if you remember the few words, you can answer any questions. So we try to do a lot of extensive exercise and try to compile all the question in such a way what is important for the exam for DHA, HAD, MOH, or the related prometric exam. So CLL is a slow growing hematological malignancy. The most important differential point in this is the age. So whenever you come across any CLL patient, look for the age. It will never, I mean, very rarely occurs before 50 years of age. So if the age is 60, 70, think of CLL, right? It never happen in a pediatric age group like ALL. So ALL is more in the pediatric age group. AML is again in the middle age or adulthood, but this is the disease of old age. So CLL age is, median age is 60 to 70 years. It is often asymptomatic or detected on the routine evaluation. So this is very, very important that when patient goes for the body checkup, they found, they have the CLL, right? So it's on the routine evaluation. It's a commonest presentation. Another presentation along with this routine evaluation or asymptomatic, they present with the lymphadenopathy, maybe cervical, axillary or inguinal, most oftenly in the cervical region, splenomegaly because the spleen is a lymphoid organ, and lymphocytosis because it's a lymphoid malignancy. So this is the commonest presentation, elderly male or female presented with lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly and lymphocytosis in the peripheral blood. How do you diagnose the patient, especially when patient is minimal symptomatic or asymptomatic? So there is a test called as immunophenotyping or flow cytometry. This is considered to be the most sensitive and specific test for CLL. So this is learning an exam point of view. What is the most sensitive and specific test for CLL? Then the answer is immunophenotyping or flow cytometry from peripheral blood or bone marrow. Now comes to our main questions. We were talking about the question, what is the classification? What is the stage of the disease? So staging is done by the Rice stage classification. This is the international classification. How the staging comes in the picture: stage 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 stages, start from 0. So what is the 0 stage? Absolute lymphocytosis with more than 5,000 per cubic millimeter for more than 6 months. This is stage 0. So in stage 0, what is there? Only just lymphocytosis with high count, nothing else. No lymphadenopathy, no hepatomegaly, no splenomegaly, no anemia, no thrombocytopenia. Nothing. This 5 component makes the staging of CLL. So what is the stage 0 in CLL? Only just lymphocytosis and high count. Why high count? It's a leukemia, so obviously count would be high in leukemia. Leukemia means it's a malignancy of the white blood cell, right? So in CLL there is a high WBC count with there is a peripheral lymphocytosis. So this is stage 0. If it is stage 1, then what could be the changes? Lymphocytosis plus lymphadenopathy. If you go back to our MCQ, there is no lymphadenopathy, right? So it's not stage 1. There is no hepatomegaly, right? Or splenomegaly. So it's not stage 2. There is no anemia and no thrombocytopenia as per the MCQ mentioned, right? So this is absolutely a stage 0, right? So that is the answer of this question. So CLL with just lymphocytosis, high count, nothing else, it's stage 0. So keep in mind, they ask very frequently this question. Now another question is B symptoms. You many a times read in the book that what is B symptoms, right? So but you never know what is the B symptoms. So remember, B symptoms carries 3 components: fever, weight loss, and night sweat. Profuse night sweating is a that is a feature. So if the B features is present, it carries poor prognosis. Just remember or write down in your notes. If the B symptoms present, it carries poor prognosis. If absent, then it's a good, then presence of B, right? So sometimes you see the staging in the book 2A or 2B. A means absence of B symptoms. B means presence of B symptoms. What do you mean by B symptoms? Fever, weight loss, night sweat, right? So you must know that. It's a very important. How the treatment of CLL works? So usually asymptomatic patient in early stages like lymphocytosis, hepatosplenomegaly, otherwise fine. Early disease up to stage 2 or asymptomatic patient does not require any treatment. So I have many patients with CLL. Those are moving around. They are fine. They have no complaint, no fever, no hepatosplenomegaly. But the diagnosis is CLL. They are, I must be in the stage 0 or 1. So no need to treat this such type of patients, because treating early will not going to change overall prognosis and survival of the patient. So you just keep them under follow-up regularly, maybe every 3 monthly. Look for CBC, complete blood count, peripheral smear, hepatosplenomegaly, blah blah, and LDH. So if they are keep deteriorating, then you may think of or when they become symptomatic, right, then you can think of treatment. Or they go in the stage 3 or 4, you think of treatment. And treatment consists of CVP, that is cyclophosphamide, vincristine, prednisone, plus newer agent rituximab is a newer agent which can be used. So this is the treatment part, and overall prognosis is good. The 5-year overall survival is depend on the stage, but most of them in the early stage they live beyond the 5 years. So overall survival is quite good in CLL, right? And the only curative option for CLL is stem cell transplant or the bone marrow transplant, especially in the young patient, right? Those who present below 50 years of age. Is that clear? So this is about the CLL, right? So if you have any questions or query for CLL, just note down, write your queries. After the session, we will go for the discussion one by one. So it would be learning for everyone. So without wasting the time, I'm going and switching to the second question. So this first question was very interesting. That is CLL. The another question. Maybe I'll switch to the third questions. Maybe one earlier thing is missing, but I will catch up later on. Look for these questions very interestingly. We recently, a few months back, treated this same patient treated by me. What is the clinical history? 60 years non-tobacco user, non-alcoholic male, presented with the dyspnea on exertion. When there is a dyspnea on exertion, you must think of some kind of anemia, because anemia, severe anemia, usually present with the dyspnea on exertion because of low hemoglobin. No bleeding from any side. C hemoglobin is 6.5, that is why they have dyspnea. Retic count is 1%. B12 level is 150, very low. Ideally, it should be 250 to 850 for your knowledge. MCV, that is mean corpuscular volume, is 120. It's very high. Normally 80 to 100 for your knowledge. Diagnosed as a megaloblastic anemia. So now they have given you the diagnosis that, okay, 60 years male presented with some symptoms of dyspnea. Hemoglobin is quite low, 6.5. B12 is very low and MCV is high. So this is classical presentation of megaloblastic anemia or macrocytic anemia. But when there is B12 is low, it's a megaloblastic anemia. What happens to this patient after full course of B12? You had given the full course of B12. You supplemented properly with the B12, right? End of the day, what happens? His lab shows HB8. So what was the earlier 6.5 to 8, right? So after full course, it did not went up to 10, 11 or 12, or it did not become normal. Again, MCV is 110, which is not normal. 80 to 100 is normal. Liver functions, renal functions, lactate dehydrogenase is normal. Sonography or ultrasound of the abdomen tummy is normal. What will be the next appropriate investigation to reach to the diagnosis for this patient? Would you like to go for direct Coombs test? Would you like to do ANA, that is called anti-nuclear antibody by immunofluorescence technique? Sorry. The option C is bone marrow biopsy or examination, and D, iron profile. Think over these questions. What do you think that adding one investigation will going to give us the answer for this patient? Think over it for 10 seconds and write down the answer in your this notepad. This is very interesting questions. Many times I asked in the exam. It may not come like copy paste, but the logic and basic would be the same, isn't it? So answer for this question, right, is a bone marrow biopsy. Answer is a bone marrow biopsy. Why the bone marrow biopsy? Let me clarify you. See, now this is a megaloblastic. Write down in your notes when there is a high MCV, you can write down very quickly, or remember, when there is a high MCV, what are the differential diagnosis of high MCV? Normal MCV is 80 to 100. Anything more than 100 is a high MCV, or you can say macrocytic. When it is less than 80, you can say microcytic. So there are two extremities. Normal, it's called normocytic, microcytic, or macrocytic. So 80 to 100 is a normocytic. More than 100 is a macrocytic. In macrocytic or high MCV with anemia, there are few differential diagnoses. One of them is B12 deficiency, folate deficiency, alcoholism, liver disease, myelodysplastic syndrome, aplastic anemia, right? And sometimes very high reticulocytosis will present with the high MCV. So these are the few very important differential diagnosis of high MCV, right? So you have to think one of them, right? Exclude the rest of the things. Why the DCT is not the answer? First is a direct Coombs test. So direct Coombs test is to diagnose anemia if it is immune or non-immune. So when you want to say, okay, this is autoimmune hemolytic anemia, this is non-autoimmune hemolytic anemia. In that case, when you want to differentiate between immune and non-immune, go and do the direct Coombs test. Otherwise, it has no implication. So here we are not thinking of hemolytic anemia, right? Number two, ANA. So ANA is for connective tissue disorder, right? So whenever you are thinking mixed connective tissue disorder, Sjogren syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, blah blah, right? There are long list of autoimmune disease. So when you are thinking of autoimmune disease, you go for the ANA. So it is again not a concern. Iron profile is a third option. No, not iron profile. Why? Because in iron profile diagnose the iron deficiency anemia, and in iron deficiency anemia, there is never, ever, never, ever a high MCV. It must be a low MCV, less than 80, always less than 80, 80, and 80. That is iron deficiency. So it is excluded, right? When somebody present with 120, forget about iron deficiency, right? So iron is not there. So what else is remaining is a bone marrow biopsy, because high MCV, you had given the B12, ultrasound abdomen for liver and kidney is normal. There is no history of alcohol, right? No other disease. So there are two differential diagnoses could be there, right? Which present with the high MCV refractory anemia, right? At this age is either myelodysplastic syndrome or aplastic anemia, and both are the diagnosis of bone marrow. Until and unless you do the bone marrow examination, you cannot diagnose aplastic anemia or myelodysplastic syndrome. So context to that, again, if you go back to the question now, the most fitted answer is a bone marrow examination or bone marrow biopsy. So this is how it is explained, right? So answer is a bone marrow examination. So if anybody has ticked the wrong answer, just keep in mind, if such a question comes, you can go for the bone marrow examination, right? Question number 4. Get ready with your pen and paper. This is again a very interesting questions, very frequently asked in the exam, board exam and all. 15-year-old girl was admitted with anemia, chest infection, thrombocytopenia. She was treated and her symptoms has regressed. She was treated, her symptoms has regressed. If you read the questions properly, you get a lot of clue from the MCQs. So keep a watch on the MCQ. She was brought again with a fever and the same symptoms a few days later. She also seems to have a features of meningitis. What is the most likely diagnosis for this patient? Either it is AML, that is acute myeloid leukemia, ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, C, aplastic anemia, D, CML, chronic myeloid leukemia, and E, chronic lymphocytic or lymphoblastic leukemia. Think over these questions for 10-15 seconds. I'll get back to you. Are you ready with your answer? And answer is ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Again we'll dissect the same question. Why the ALL? See the age. ALL is usually in the child age, right? Or in the early childhood, right? So commonest presentation of ALL is in the childhood. So 15 years. So again, it's favoring ALL. Second thing, anemia, chest infection, and thrombocytopenia. So there must be some pancytopenia, right? She was treated and her symptoms has regressed. So she must receive some chemotherapy or steroid. She was brought again with the fever and the symptoms. So there is some kind of relapse. She also seems to have features of meningitis. This is the clue in the diagnosis that the ALL has highest risk of CNS relapse, or they may present with the CNS disease, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. AML, aplastic, CML, and CLL never present with the meningitis. So meningitis is the commonest presentation of ALL, and that is the reason why the ALL patient has, given the intrathecal methotrexate. If you know, or if you have in the ward, or if you have seen some leukemia ward round or rotation, right, in your residency, there is a all ALL patient, acute lymphoblastic leukemia patient, they have given the intrathecal methotrexate, and that is a CNS prophylaxis, cerebral central nervous system prophylaxis, to prevent the meningitis, right? So the ALL is the closest answer for this patient. AML, if it is AML, then what could be the AML never present with meningitis? There is no mentioning about the OR rods. Age is not fitting. There is a no or rods in the peripheral smear. No mention of about anything about ALL. Aplastic anemia, bone marrow is empty, so nothing suggestive of the aplastic, right? And aplastic never present with meningitis. CML, usually massive splenomegaly and high count. They rarely present with the anemia and thrombocytopenia, right? And there is a presence of Philadelphia chromosome. There is a presence of Philadelphia chromosome. And CLL, again, as I told you in the first slide, CLL present with the elderly people, usually in the 60 to 70s. Lymphocytosis, lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, and they have flow cytometry is the diagnosis. So considering the context of the disease and the presentation, more fitted the ALL.
Excuse me, sir.
Can you ask the questions later on if you don't mind? You just write down. I will try to sort out your queries. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, please. We'll discuss after the session. Yeah, please. This slide is little bit some technical issue, but I will read it on for you. So first line is cut off. A 10 years of old boy presented with complaint of nosebleed, bleeding after brushing his teeth. He is unsure of how long this has been occurring, but decided to seek advice after having to continually excusing himself from this lesion. On examination, you notice he has some skin bruise. Blood test shows prolonged bleeding time. So this is clue for you. 10 years of boy with excessive bleeding from gums off and on. Now on the blood test, prolonged bleeding, activated partial thromboplastin time is high, right? Right. So he has a prolonged bleeding time and prolonged APTT with platelet counts and prothrombin times are within normal limits. So PT and platelet is normal. What is the most likely diagnosis for this patient? First is a von Willebrand disease, that is A. Sorry for having like overlapping of the words, but the option A is a von Willebrand disease. Option B is a liver disease. Option C is a disseminated intravascular coagulation. D is a congenital afibrinogenemia, and E is a Glanzmann's thrombasthenia. Think over this question for again 5-10 seconds. I'll get back to you. Fine, fair enough. So I don't know what you thought of the answer, but the answer is a von Willebrand disease. Answer is a von Willebrand disease. Von Willebrand disease, there are three entities of von Willebrand disease. It's a very simple, don't get confused. It's a commonest congenital, this inherited disorder, von Willebrand disease. There is one factor in our blood or in the plasma, right? Like all clotting factor, factor 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 2, 5, 10. Like same, there is a clotting factor. There is one factor that is called von Willebrand factor. So if the von Willebrand factor is disturbed, it can cause the von Willebrand disease. So there are three entities medically, type 1, 2, and 3. If you go through this slide, type 1, right, what you find in the type 1 is a level. So low von Willebrand factor level. So when you want to diagnose von Willebrand disease, what the test you will going to request is, do the serum von Willebrand factor assay, right, or quantitative von Willebrand factor in the blood or plasma. So you get to know that it is not it is normal, low, or what's the level. So type 1, it is most common as 75 to 80% of the patients belongs to type 1 von Willebrand factor. What you find in the blood is a low von Willebrand factor level. And what is the commonest symptoms is the most common form of the disease. Symptoms are usually mild. So this type of patient usually present with a mild bleeding, maybe mild gum bleeding, mild hematuria, right, mild bleeding oozing after injury. So it is a very mild, right? Type 2, it's a bit more difficult than type 1. What is the difference between 1 and 2? In 1, there is a level of the von Willebrand factor is level. The beauty here is the level is absolutely normal von Willebrand factor. But what's the problem? There is a problem in the quality. Quantity is normal, but quality is a default at fault. So von Willebrand factor does not work correctly. So there are two problems in any agent. Two problems. One is qualitative problem. One is a quantitative problem. So in type 1 is there's a quantitative problem. Quantity is less than normal, right? While in 2, quantity is normal, but whatever the quality of von Willebrand factor is there, it's not working properly or doing his job properly. That is why patient
I cannot hear anything.
That is why it's presented with the bleeding. Sir, check your mic, I guess. There is some problem at your end, sir. 32 doctors are, getting properly. So just please check your mic, sir. So type 2 is a normal von Willebrand factor, but the quality is not well. That is why bleeding is there. And 10 to 20% of the patient, 15-20% of the patient falls to this category, and symptoms are moderate. 1 is mild, 2 is moderate, 3 is very severe. So type 2 is a little moderate symptoms, and type 3 is there is a no von Willebrand. So there is an absence, right, of von Willebrand factor. So it is a worst form of von Willebrand disease. It is very rare. Less than 5% patient fortunately have fall in this category, so it's good. Otherwise, it's a very bad disease and usually causes the most severe symptoms. They present with this excessive bleeding. So this is the very important and interesting chart, right? I come across, right, to find that this would be very easy for you to remember and you to understand and learn von Willebrand disease. Otherwise, many times we get lots of confusion that what's 1, what's 2, what's 3. So I think this is the most easiest slide for you to remember and for you to learn from these things, right? What's the level, what's the percentage and symptoms. The treatment part is remaining in this slide, but type 1 desmopressin you can use for the treatment. Desmopressin, right, is an initial treatment for type 1. And sometimes you can use the cryoprecipitate in emergency room because cryoprecipitate contains the von Willebrand factor, right? So cryoprecipitate is one of the product for the treatment of von Willebrand disease. So this is again a very interesting question for us. So I'm not going in much detail. What happens to the other entity, I'll just mention. For von Willebrand, why not it is a liver disease? I want to differentiate why it is von Willebrand, why not liver disease. So liver disease, basically there should be usually a history of alcoholism. It is not there. 10 years of age, so liver disease is less likely. In liver disease, usually PT and APTT is high, right? It has nothing to do with the platelet and bleeding time, so they are normal, right? So liver disease is excluded. Why not DIC? As per the option C, because in DIC there are 3 things: low platelet, high PT and PTT. So platelet is here normal, PT is normal, so that is again excluded, right? And there is no history of any infection, inflammation or some precipitating factor for DIC in a scenario. So DIC is by lab and by history is gone. Congenital afibrinogenemia is a congenital things where the fibrinogen is absent. Afibrinogenemia means absence of fibrinogen, which is again a very rare disease where you usually see the low level of fibrinogen in the blood, which is not mentioned in the scenario, as well as there is high PT and APTT, which is not there. And Glanzmann's thrombasthenia is a platelet functions disorder, right? And there is no increase in the APTT in Glanzmann's thrombasthenia, so that is again excluded. So concluding all the inclusion and exclusion criteria, von Willebrand disease is the closest answer for this, right? Another question number 6. This 44-year Asian, old Asian female present with the 2 months history of shortness of breath and lethargy. 41st female, shortness of breath and lethargy. She denies any intolerance to the cold or any changes in her weight, and on examination appears slightly pale. She states that she has recently become a vegetarian. A blood film shows a presence of elliptocytes, and blood result shows the following. Now this is a 44, reasonably a young lady, right, with no other symptoms, paler, recently became vegetarian. On peripheral smear, you looks under microscope the elliptocytes. So now this is the picture. Hemoglobin of 9.9 gram per deciliter. Mean corpuscular volume is bit low. 80 to 100 is normal, as I told you. Ferritin is low. What is the most likely diagnosis for this patient? Iron deficiency anemia, anemia of chronic disease, sideroblastic anemia, thalassemia trait, or hereditary elliptocytosis? Think of these questions for a minute and then we'll check. I think this is the most easiest question in the session. So this is the answer is iron deficiency anemia. See, why the iron deficiency anemia? Everybody should get pen and paper and write down whenever in any MCQ, in any exam, if the ferritin is low, there is no other differential diagnosis. It is none other than iron deficiency anemia. Even if you read the MCQ, if you don't read MCQ, if you read the CBC, if you don't read a CBC, whatever they had given in peripheral smear, low ferritin, only one diagnosis. There is no differential diagnosis, and there is iron deficiency anemia. So if you just stick to the one thing, but there are a lot of points favoring the iron deficiency. I will go through it shortly. 41st female must be menstruating, so that is one reason for low hemoglobin and iron deficiency. Number two, there is another thing is there is a presence of she become recently vegetarian, so there are, I mean, that is again iron and B12 is commonest in vegans. Number two, elliptocytosis again seen iron deficiency. So iron deficiency can see all elliptocytosis, target cell, pencil cell, right? Hypochromic microcytic in the peripheral smear. So I'm not going in much detail. If someone has keen interest, just let me know. We'll discuss later on one-to-one. But this is all classically seen. Hemoglobin is low, MCV, you see the low. So low MCV, because the red blood cells are not forming, RBCs is small, that is why MCV is small. And to support that, ferritin is low. Ferritin suggests the store of the iron. So when the store is low, there must be an iron deficiency. So ferritin is a protein which gives you the idea about the store of the iron. So iron storage, if you want to know, do the ferritin. If the ferritin is low, it's iron deficiency. Now we'll going very quickly. Why not BCD? Anemia of chronic disease. Usually the ferritin is normal or high. Write down in your notes. This is the most important differentiating point. When you have iron deficiency anemia, ferritin is low. When you have anemia of chronic disease, ferritin is either normal or high. In anemia of chronic disease, ferritin is there, but it is not utilized well to form the hemoglobin, right? That is the reason and pathology. So ferritin is normal or high. Some patients have high ferritin with anemia, right? And that is anemia of chronic disease. Sideroblastic anemia usually in the elderly people, and MCV could be MCV could be low or high, right? But they won't have the low ferritin. Thalassemia trait, there is a presence of HbA2. Hemoglobin A2 would be high, which is not in the scenario, and they never present with the low ferritin, so it's not thalassemia trait. And hereditary elliptocytosis, again, not present with the low ferritin. There are more than 10% of the elliptocytosis in the peripheral smear with normal ferritin can conclude the hereditary elliptocytosis, which is again not the case here. So this concludes again the iron deficiency anemia. So our answer is iron deficiency anemia. If you have any queries, question, please be patient. Write down in your notes. We'll discuss one by one after 10 minutes or 15 minutes after the session is over. So this is the excellent slide I created, normal, iron deficiency, anemia, chronic disease, and mixed. So I will post this whole the webinar slides, all slides from first to last in the group. So don't worry if you miss some slides or you did not take pictures or something, I'll post it in the group. So you can see it later on. So this is the all learning points. I'm not going to go much in detail. So now this is another next questions. 65 years old woman suffers significant bleeding during a difficult bowel dissection, and it's prescribed 3 units of blood after operation is completed. It is the first time she has required a blood transfusion. So first time blood transfusion after operation may have some bleeding complication. Her details are checked carefully. Approximately 4 hours after the transfusion, the patient feels acutely unwell after transfusion, 4 hours, and complains of fever, chills, and dry cough. Blood pressure is 110/80. Temperature is of 38, oxygen saturation is 94% at the room air. What could be the most likely diagnosis for this patient? So just keep in mind what's the scenario, what's going on with this lady, right? That what happens and bleeding and all post operation needs transfusion, and now presented with fever, cough, and chills, right? With the this vitals, it's already mentioned here. So what could be the diagnosis? Is it immediate hemolytic transfusion reaction? Is it febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reaction? Is it delayed hemolytic transfusion reaction? Transfusion reaction? Is it IgA deficiency? Is it transfusion related lung injury? So brainstorm, little brainstorm. If you want to go back, you go back to the scenario. This is the scenario for you. So you think over it that what could be the diagnosis of this patient? What happens wrong with this patient after operation, after transfusion? Something went wrong. Because of that, she become little feverish, uh, chills, dry cough, and something gone wrong. Fine. So answer of this question is transfusion related acute lung injury. First, let me read it. We can discuss later on. Patient is suffering from the complication of blood transfusion, specifically the transfusion related acute lung injury. This is NTT. So now you go and read the complication. Immediate complication, long term complication. Long term is I mean HIV, HBsAg, HCV. It's all long term. Once you transfuse, you may give to someone for HIV, HBsAg, HCV if not screened and checked properly. But there could be some immediate reaction, which could be febrile, non-febrile, TRALI, and all. So go and read it. Very important in clinical practice. So this is TRALI, transfusion related acute lung injury. This can be a life-threatening complication whereby within 2 to 6 hours after transfusion, an inflammatory process causes sequestration of the neutrophil within the lungs and accumulation of the antibody, and this all can cause the lung injury, right? And patient, I've seen couple of patients in my ICU where they present after immediately after transfusion in 1 or 2 hours, they presented exactly the same. With there is an infiltration in the chest, fever, chills, rigor, and one patient is in hypotension. So they are in the very bad condition. And unfortunately, the treatment is just the supportive care. You can't do anything for this patient. You just need to maintain ABC. You maintain the proper airway, breathing, circulation, oxygen, blah blah, right? So you have to wait and watch. You can't do anything, and sometimes may need the ventilatory support. If the extensive lung involvements are there, you may need the ventilatory support for such type of patient. TRALI, transfusion related acute lung injury, it's acute episode. Hypoxia is common. So when patient presented or before transfusion, the saturation could be around 95, 96, 78, but now it's less than 90. It's going down. The onset of the symptoms and signs occurs during, I mean, within the 6 hours of transfusion. No pre-existing acute lung injury before transfusion, and there could be a bilateral lung infiltrates on the X-ray, which was normal earlier. So that's the classical presentation. So that's the answer. Very interesting question next. A 57 years old woman with adenocarcinoma of sigmoid colon with a liver metastasis is attending for 6 cycles of palliative FOLFOX chemotherapy. The name of regimen is FOLFOX. FOLFOX contains folinic acid, 5-fluorouracil, and oxaliplatin. These three drugs cumulatively known as a FOLFOX chemotherapy. Which tumor marker can be measured in the blood to indicate that the effect of chemotherapy? So this patient has a colon cancer with liver metastasis, came for 6 cycle of chemotherapy. You want to know the response of the treatment. You need to know what's going on with the patient, whether the patient is improving or not. What blood test could be the highest helpful to this patient to monitor the disease or the treatment response? That is the question. So what will you measure in the blood? Either alpha fetoprotein, you go for beta HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, you go for the CA 19-9, that is a tumor marker, carcinogenic antigen 125, and CEA, that is carcinoembryonic antigen. So these are the question, right? These are the tumor markers. So think over it for this 10-15 seconds and get back to me. So it's easy, but it looks little tricky as well, I guess. So see the tumor marker. Now, what's the tumor marker? So tumor marker, the name itself suggests it presents the tumor. It marks on the tumor cells. So when something goes wrong with the cells and tumor, they liberate some kind of enzyme, liberate some kind of protein from the tumor cell, which increases in the plasma or the blood, and which helps in the diagnosis, in the treatment follow-up, at the time of the relapse. This tumor marker will help you to get the idea. So what are the learning points in tumor marker? So tumor markers can be used for many purposes. One is a screening purpose, right? How come screening purpose? You are thinking some female comes with a bilateral ovarian mass, and you are thinking it could be CA ovary, cancer ovary. What will you monitor? CA125. So you do it for screening purpose. So screening purpose. Another two is a disease staging. If you want to stage the disease. Number three, response to the therapy. So when you give the treatment, that the extremes of tumor markers will get back to normal. So you know that okay, treatment is responding. And fourth thing is a disease relapse or recurrence. So once the disease, when you diagnose the prostate cancer with 100 PSA, after treatment, it get back to normal PSA, and after 1 year again it back to again 100. So there is a relapse. So at the time of relapse, you also get the idea that okay, fine, this is relapsing. So these all are the important issues with the tumor markers. So at the screening, staging, diagnosis, treatment, relapse, and follow. These all are the importance of doing the tumor marker. So you must think of doing the tumor marker in every cancer patient wherever it is available, like prostate PSA, breast CA15-3, ovary CA125, right? The same way, the alpha fetoprotein is for hepatocellular carcinoma and teratomas. So now you go open the book and read whether alpha fetoprotein is there in the hepatocellular carcinoma or not. So it is yes, it is there. When you want to do the hepatocellular carcinoma diagnosis, what we are looking is alpha fetoprotein, and we look for the screening of ultrasound abdomen, right, to look for some kind of tumor in the liver, and usually more commonly seen in hepatitis B and hepatitis C positive patient. So when I'm seeing in my OPDs, when hepatitis B C is positive, alpha fetoprotein is high, I think in my mind or back of the mind, what is going on is hepatocellular carcinoma. Same way, teratomas and testicular tumors, you get see the alpha fetoprotein is high. So it is not for the colon, it is for the liver and testis. So it is gone. Beta HCG is raised in seminoma, teratoma, and choriocarcinoma. So it is gone. CA19-9 is mainly for the pancreatic cancer and the gallbladder, right? CA125 mainly for the ovary, and there are few other non-malignant conditions where CA125 can be increased. So answer is a CEA that can be raised in gastric cancer, pancreatic, and the colon cancer, right? So this is the very important understanding which we need to know. And this is very excellent slide. If you can see on your screen, tumor marker, if you can see lung CA, liver alpha fetoprotein, prostate PSA, if you come down, testicular AFP SCG, breast 125, and HER2 stomach, HER2 as well as CA, colon CA, pancreatic and ovarian, right? So colon is specifically the CEA. So just shortly to tell you, GI malignancy or gastrointestinal malignancy has some relation with the CEA. So whenever you see the gastrointestinal malignancy in your practice or in your clinic hospital, think of CEA, because it helps for the treatment response at the time of relapse, or how effective your chemotherapy is working. It will give you the idea. So answer is the CEA. Question number 9. 29, now we are about to finish in next couple of slides. 20, considering the time, I am not going in much detail, and I have lots of slides in my 15-20 years of practice, but I'll just try to make it simplified, exam point of view related, not much complicated. Question number 9, 29 years old woman complaining of 1 week history of weakness and malaise. She has recently become vegetarian and eats mostly the green vegetable, drinks lots of tea during a day. She is apyrexic, CRP is less than 5, which is normal. Everybody now knows the CRP in COVID era, right? CRP, everybody knows CRP now, even layman knows CRP. So normally it is less than 5. You suspect an abnormality of the patient's iron store. Which of the most appropriate investigation to determine the store of the iron level? I already told you, right? I mean, this is the very easy question. So what's the question? What is the most appropriate investigation to determine the store of the iron? Bone marrow examination, ferritin, iron, TIBC, or transferrin saturation or transferrin level? So you must be writing the answer, but it's a ferritin because ferritin represent the store of the iron. So measuring the patient's serum ferritin provides an accurate reflection of the body's iron store, since the serum ferritin originates from the storage pool in the bone marrow, liver, and spleen. So the rest of the things you can read it later on just to save the time. So iron store, if you want to know, do the ferritin. That is the best test to do for iron storage. Again, couple of last interesting slide. A 22-year-old man with testicular cancer has undergone an inguinal orchiectomy. So young man with testicular cancer operated for orchiectomy. Histology confirms the teratomas is the diagnosis, histological. Post-operative CT scan shows involvement of para-aortic lymph node. Which of the following treatment is the best post-operative option? This question was asked in the last exam. Chemotherapy, lymph node dissection, radiotherapy, chemo and radiotherapy, concurrent, surveillance with the tumor marker. What could be the answer? Just think over it. Let me know. Fine. So answer is a chemotherapy, right? So testicular tumor or the germ cell tumor, 95% of the tumor in the testis, just for your knowledge, 95% of the testicular malignant tumor are the germ cell tumor. Only 5% are the non-germ cell. So 95 is germ cell, 5% is a non-germ cell. Germ cell tumor includes what? What do you mean by germ cell, right? So you heard the name seminoma, right? Right? That is the common one, most commonly. Teratomas, right? A non-germ cell tumor includes leading cell tumor, Sertoli cell tumor, and sarcomas of the testis, right? Which is very rare, right? So 95% is a germ cell tumor, right? So the treatment of the testicular is depends on the stage, how the staging, right? So stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. This patient is basically post orchiectomy. There is presence of the lymph nodes in para-aortic region. Chemotherapy is the best treatment for such patient. So never ever miss, even with the advanced stage, for your kind knowledge, even with the stage 4, if the disease spreads up to the mediastinum, still in testicular cancer especially, BEP is a treatment of choice. B stands for bleomycin, E stands for etoposide, and P stands for platinum. There are two agents, cisplatin and carboplatin. So that is why P, platinum, the name comes cisplatin. So BEP based chemotherapy is the best and standard of care for testicular cancer. Now again, there is some problem in the slide, but I don't want to miss this slide. This is one of the best slide and excellent things. I remember this question. So this patient is a 40 years male presented with the fever, bleeding from nose and bone pain. He has no comorbidity, not on any medication. He's a smoker and diabetic. He was investigated and workup was done. What this is the clue mainly. CBC HB 9 gram%, total count is 2500 cubic millimeter, platelet count is just 90,000, right? He has a low B12 on examination around 200, right? Chest X-ray normal, ultrasound abdomen normal, no lymphadenopathy, no hepatomegaly, both, right? Both the kidneys are shrunken, maybe because of diabetes. There is a history. Bone marrow biopsy was done for this patient, considering the pancytopenia. See the CBC, hemoglobin low, white cell low, platelet low, right? And there was also B12, so could be some megaloblastic or some bone marrow issues. So did the bone marrow? and bone marrow shows this picture. So look at this picture. This exact picture will come in your exam. Look at the picture and diagnose the things. What could be the diagnosis? Look at the picture. If you see my cursor and my this slide on my computer, what you can see, this is the diagnosis. Anyway, we'll go for the option. What could be the diagnosis? Is it acute myeloid leukemia? Is it acute lymphoblastic leukemia? It is chronic myeloid leukemia. Is it chronic lymphoblastic leukemia? Is it acute viral infection? Just think of this uh, picture. Picture is the diagnosis. Even if you don't get the history or nothing, if you just see the picture, it's a diagnosis, irrespective of CBC. If you have seen such picture in book or under microscope, you never miss it out. Fine. Write down your answer and then check how many you tick right and wrong end of the session. So the diagnosis absolutely is AML. Now see, go back to the slide. I will give you excellent learning point. This is classically myeloblast. And this all small stick-like structure you see in the plasma is a OR rod, called as OR rod, AUER, OR rods. So write down in your notes, sir, that presence of OR rod means AML. Any MCQ comes in the exam, if you come across that, okay, presence of OR rod, look for AML in the option. That's it, nothing else. Like low ferritin, look for iron deficiency, anemia, nothing else. AML, look for OR rods, or if OR rod is present, AML, no other diagnosis. So this patient is a acute promyelocytic leukemia or AML, right? It is a cancer of white blood cell, right? And this is classical OR rods, what you can see. You can write down few other learning points in AML. I need to tell you very quickly. I think some part is missing, but you can write down very quickly. I want you to tell AML, right? OR rod means AML, number one learning point. Number two learning point, AML M3. There are M0 to M7 subtype in AML, M0 to M7, right? Different subtype which can categorize by the immunophenotyping or flow cytometry. As I told you first slide in CL, same thing, the diagnosis is done by the AML, done by the flow cytometry, right? So OR rods means AML. AML has M0 to M7 subtype. Best prognosis amongst all subtype is M3, that is called acute promyelocytic leukemia or APML or AML M3. All are the same thing, same name, everything is same. It's a different name, right? So that has the best prognosis. All AML is treated with the chemotherapy. The only change in the treatment in all subtype M0 to M7 is the M3 subtype. Why? Because in M3 subtype, there is one translocation of the gene called as a translocation in 1517 gene, all called as a RAR alpha gene translocation, right? And that can be blocked by one drug that is called ATRA, ATRA, all trans retinoic acid. Write down all trans retinoic acid. This is board exam question. What drug is helpful in AML M3? So ATRA, ATRA, or all trans retinoic acid. And lastly, this APL M3 subtype commonly present with the DIC. So any questions of AML mention that this patient present with the DIC, number one diagnosis is M3, APL M3 or acute promyelocytic leukemia, right? So these are all high yield quick learning points for AML. So this is the, again, I'm going back to the slide. Look for this rod. You will see the same picture in your exam. This is a classical for AML, right? And I guess the last slide for our session, question number 10, considering the time, I'm not going in a lot of slides. Question 12, 40 years female presented with a cervical lymphadenopathy, fever, night sweat, and weight loss. So again, see the B symptoms. As I told you earlier, what is B symptoms? Fever, weight loss, and night sweat. That is B symptoms. So somebody 40 years female with cervical lymphadenopathy with B symptoms. She has mild cough, no hemoptysis or chest pain. She investigated her vitals are stable, and on investigation and examination, she feels there is a tender, palpable, rubbery filled lymph nodes in the neck. TBC is normal. There is no problem in complete blood count. ESR is 100 after 1 hour. Viral serology of HIV HBS is negative. Chest X-ray is normal, right? And you did the lymph node biopsy was done, which shows this picture. What's the diagnosis? So it's again excellent picture, very frequently asked in the exam. So you see this is the lymph node picture. You look at the picture properly, you get the diagnosis only in the picture, like AML or rods, right? So if you see the or rods, it's AML. Same way, the lymph node and history, if you see the lymph node and if you correlate with the history, you get the diagnosis. Again, but just for your knowledge, I'm going for the options as well. So what could be the option? It could be tuberculous lymphadenitis, it is acute leukemia, it is reactive lymph node biopsy changes, it is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it is Hodgkin's lymphoma. Again, go back to slide, think of the option. These are the option: TB, lymphoma, leukemia, and non-specific. So this is the slide, right? So answer is a Hodgkin's lymphoma, classical Hodgkin's lymphoma. Again, go back to the MCQ. 40 years female, commonly seen. Hodgkin's lymphoma usually present with the cervical lymphadenopathy with classical rubbery fill in the neck. ESR is usually high. Chest X-ray is normal because of there is no tuberculosis, no mediastinal lymphadenopathy, nothing, just neck node. And this lymph node biopsy shows a Reed-Sternberg cell. If you can see my cursor on the these things, a Reed-Sternberg cell. Can you see this the cells in the center, which is the cell like all eye? You know the all bird all eye.
Yes,
So
sir.
it's like yeah. So this is like all eye. So whenever you see the picture same where the two this lymphoid tissues within the one cell, it looks like all eye, right? Classical, it is a Reed-Sternberg cell. Reed, presence of RS cell or Reed-Sternberg cell. Reed and Sternberg are the name of the people who invented this. That is how the name comes. Still Reed-Sternberg cell. So nothing to do with the RS cell. No scientific name. It's the name of the person. So Reed-Sternberg cell is the cell which is looks like all eye in lymph node biopsy or spleen biopsy or bone marrow biopsy. Wherever you see from the lymphoid organ biopsy, Reed-Sternberg cell like all eye cell, it is a Hodgkin's lymphoma. And if it is absence of RSL, it is called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So primarily classification of Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's is based on presence or absence of the Reed-Sternberg cell. If it is present, it is Hodgkin's. If absent, it's non-Hodgkin's. Is that clear? So this is classical of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And there are few learning points I would like to tell you, which are again the question in the exam. There are four subtypes of Hodgkin's lymphoma, mainly four subtypes. Nodular sclerosis. What is a what you need to know for nodular sclerosis? It is the most common histology. This all subtype 4 can be diagnosed only and only by immunohistochemistry. Write down. So you cut the lymph node, you can see the Reed-Sternberg cell, but sometimes you may not differentiate, right? It is nodular, mixed cellularity, lymphocyte predominant, blah blah. So immunohistochemistry will differentiate the subtype of Hodgkin's lymphoma by specifying the what kind of cells, CD cells. You heard of CD cell, right? CD10, CD20, CD24. That is called cluster differentiation cell. And every cell, every tissue, every organ has a specific CD cell presentation on their cell surface. So on that we know that okay, this is myeloid, this is lymphoid, this is new dendritical cell, this is lymphoid cell, this is this cells, right? So this is cluster differentiation cell on the surface of the cell. So this immunohistochemistry can differentiate this. So there are four subcategory of Hodgkin's lymphoma. That is nodular sclerosis, most common. They will ask in the exam what is the most commonest histopathology in Hodgkin's lymphoma. So select nodular sclerosis. They ask what histology carries the best prognosis. This who has a better chance of cure, right, and better chance of long-term and overall survival. Then the answer is lymphocyte predominant. If they ask which one is the worst one, which behave very badly, they die fast, such type of patient, so that is lymphocyte depleted. right? So this is LD, lymphocyte depleted. So this is the bad one. So these are the multiple question in one slide. And this is the classical presentation of Hodgkin's lymphoma is fever, weightless, and night sweat. That is B symptoms. As I told you, read Sternberg cells in the biopsy of mainly the lymph nodes or bone marrow, liver, spleen, or suspected site. You can see the all eye in the lymph node biopsy or the structure from biopsy. And MCQ picture of in the picture, what the picture is shown in the MCQ, that is a picture of classical nodular sclerosis. That is the most commonest pathology in Hodgkin's lymphoma. So in lastly, the Hodgkin's lymphoma, the any lymphoma rather, diagnosis is done by the lymph node biopsy, that is excisional lymph node biopsy. Subtype, as I told you, by the ISC, that is immunohistochemistry, and staging is done by CT scan or PET scan, where the disease is spread above diaphragm and below diaphragm. As you know, the classification comes, and the treatment is ABVD, that is called adriamycin, bleomycin, vinblastine, and dacarbazine. And this is again very commonly asked in exam, what regimen you use for Hodgkin's lymphoma. The first line treatment is ABVD, right? That is adria, bleo, vinblastine, and DT. For non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, for your knowledge, it's a CHOP therapy. CHOP, CHOP, doxorubicin, cyclophosphamide, vincristine, and prednisolone. That is CHOP. And sometimes we add rituximab. It is called R-CHOP, right? So this is for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and this is for the Hodgkin's lymphoma. So this is all quick learning points from my side. So I think I'm done for now. I need to discuss lots of questions, but considering the time, I completed my session in 66 minutes altogether with my level-based try. So hopefully everyone enjoyed this session. So I'm once again thankful to all respected doctors who spent their time in the Eid, and I'm extremely sorry if I did it late. I'm extremely thankful for all. So I'm again very thankful to my IT team, Sagar Rathod, who is in the meeting now, and who is the man who is completely guiding us and making this smooth presentation from backhand. And again, all my team members, Dr. Manisha Phadke, Dr. Meghna, once again, Dr. Sabnam, Dr. Hasiba, as well as this Dr. Uh, all team. So I'm very, very thankful to all my team, right? And our WhatsApp group is very active. So I'm once again very thankful for all active members and Dr. Arti, our pediatric specialist as well. One thing I need to tell you that Dr. Arti is a specialist pediatrician in our team. Those who wants to take only pediatric lecture for DHA, HAD, MOH, Oman, or USMLE, whatever. She is quite a brilliant lady. We are working together in the same hospital. She is quite academic doctor. She took lecture for a couple of my coaching students, and they extremely happy. So if somebody needs help from pediatric point of view, and I request Dr. Arti as well to take one pediatric same session, if possible for us. So we also learn. I'm hematologist, so I need to learn the pediatric as well. So once again, I'm very thankful to all my team who did a lot of exercise for last few days to make this webinar successful. And the biggest success to all my channel subscriber, my users, my followers, and my friends, and my respected doctors who are present in this session and make it successful. I think Mr. Sagar, I guess from 50, I think 30, 35 people join, but it's not bad. Not the number is important. Whatever I taught or whatever I shared my experience, I think that is worth, I guess, irrespective of the numbers. So hopefully you all enjoy. So once again, thank you very much. And I hand over again to the Meghna, my team member. And just lastly, I would like to tell that Meghna is quite academic lady as well. So she will now come up with the totally different webinar with data flow. So we are getting lots of calls from the data flow, doctors from data flow, documents, what they stuck up there, attestation is required or not, how to link, how to upload. There are hundreds of questions, payment. payment gateways and experience related and all. So Dr. Meghna is quite brilliant in that these things. So I would like to invite Meghna for a couple of more minutes and share her experience or some expertise or special comment on this. Thank you very much. Over to Meghna.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and I hope it was informative and everyone has enjoyed it. So actually, we also, first of all, sir, thank you for this excellent presentation, and also for sharing all the important tips from an exam point of view. I'm sure that these were most of the repeated questions, and I'm sure that it's going to help the doctors in the upcoming exams. And we also have a wonderful team of doctors which is always there to help and support. We have especially Dr. Farah, Dr. Manisha, and Dr. Sana. All of them are always there to guide. So please do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us, be it related to, for any queries related to study materials, exam preparation, or coaching or data flow services. All of us are always there to help out the students. And today's presentation will be uploaded on our website, so all of us can have an access to it. So I think now we'll have the we'll be announcing the next webinar very soon, and I think it will be either to do with pediatrics or the data flow session, but we'll keep you all updated. And I think now we'll have the doubt clearance session. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Meghna.
Yeah.
Now, few friends have some queries. Sorry, I interrupted early, but now please go ahead. And if you have any queries, we can discuss 10-15 minutes more, and then we'll just pack up the session. Question, please. Hello.
Sir, I want
Yes.
to ask one question.
Yes, please.
In the picture section, if I want to differentiate between that ALL and CLL, how can I differentiate between the two in picture?
In picture, ALL, there is a usually blast cell. Blast cell is basically premature cell, right? What happens in the bone marrow from premature to mature? What we see in the peripheral blood or the blood is a mature cell, mature lymphocyte. So in CLL, there is absolutely a mature form of the lymphocyte in the peripheral blood, while in ALL, there is absolutely an immature form of the lymphocyte in the blood. That is the biggest differentiation. Number two, in ALL, CBC is usually the altered. When there is acute leukemia, this is, I'm sharing the hardcore experience. Usually there must be a thrombocytopenia. There must be a thrombocytopenia, whether AML or ALL, when they present to you in the clinic, 9 out of 10, they have thrombocytopenia. I treated in hundreds all ALL and AML in last 15 years. So this is the clinical experience. So a thrombocytopenia can be seen in ALL, which is not seen in CLL, especially in very, very early disease. Very much advanced disease, you can see the things. ALL, the blasts are quite big, while the small looking lymphocytes in the peripheral blood in CLL is smaller than even RBC. If you see under the microscope, right, the leukemic cell or lymphoblast in the ALL is quite big like WBC, while in chronic lymphoblastic leukemia in peripheral smear, the lymphocyte is quite mature looking, what you see in the picture, and it is very smaller in size than RBC, that is a normal looking. So that is again a microscopic differentiation in ALL and CLL.
Thank you, sir.
Sir,
Yes.
Yes, me, sir. So, is there any subject-wise weightage, like which subject is more important, anything like that, sir?
No, doctor. I mean,
No.
unfortunately, there is no, I mean, defined this border in DHA, HAD or MOH. But whatever we discuss, I can briefly tell you anemia is very common because it's a, I mean, across the globe, I mean, it's very common. Another thing is hemoglobinopathies. I will discuss couple of slides, but because of time, I did not went long slides. So hemoglobinopathies, especially in a Middle East country, I've seen when I was in Muscat practicing, there was lots of thalassemia and sickle cell anemia. So you must know sickle cell anemia and thalassemia. Number three is a leukemias. This all AML, ALL, and CML. It's a very simple and Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So these are the very and B12 deficiency. These are the very commonly asked topics in the exam. They won't ask you the very high-fi or some out of the way, but you must know the basic thing: how to diagnose iron deficiency, how to differentiate with the anemia of chronic disease, how you diagnose the hemoglobinopathies or sickle cell disease, how you interpret the hemoglobin as of 25% in hemoglobin electrophoresis, blah blah. Right, so these all are common things what the slides we have seen. These all common topics I selected, so I did not selected some hi-fi or in detail or something like that. We can organize another session of hematology maybe if you like this with another slide. Like we did not cover all topics in 1 hour, you understand, right?
Yes,
but
sir.
the,
Yeah.
but the logic is that I mean, at least you get some brief commonest topic I selected. So sometimes we may discuss of warfarin and bleeding disorder, how the clotting cascade and interpretation we do in the clinical practice, right? How the hemophilia A and B, what's the hemolytic anemias, right? So there are few other topics is pending, but I think in next session, maybe after some time, we may cover the untouched part of the hematology. So I think most of them will be covered. But whatever we discussed today is almost you must know this. I mean, this is the bottom line.
Okay, so it will be very helpful if you include hemoglobinopathies and bleeding disorders in detail.
Definitely, I'll prepare for another session. Hopefully, maybe in next couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks. Let me look into the schedule, and we'll definitely will do it the same session.
So thank you very much, sir.
No worries.
Thank you.
No problem. Any question? So, do we have any questions? Hello? Any questions from the house? Or we'll just pack up the session? Any question? Hello? Any session?
Okay.
Any question? Okay, fine. So thank you very much. I would be great and glad that if you can just post your reviews on our group as well, how you did like this session and all total presentation, and you can post me or Meghna or our team, any of the members, all groups and email IDs and mobile numbers and everything is there on the website. So everyone is helpful. So you can contact anyone, not just me. It's not, I mean, we are a team, not me alone. So you can approach to any of the members in our team. Okay, so if you do not have any questions, so I think Sagar, I think it's time to pack up, and I'm once again very thankful all for the joining, and we'll shortly announce the next webinar. Meghna, anything else?
I think so. Yeah, almost done. We covered up everything. If there are no queries, then I think we can pack up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks all for
a lot.
joining.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you very
Yeah.
much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
See you in the
Yeah.
next webinar. Bye bye. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thank you.
Bye
sir.
bye. Bye bye.